CIA and Pentagon.
How long had the CIA been surveying Lee Harvey Oswald before the assassination attempt?
4 years.
4 years. And what are some of the highlights of the CIA's pre-assassination file on Lee Harvey Oswald?
They started reading his mail on November 9th, 1959, and they intercepted a number of letters between him and his mother. Those letters were forwarded to James Angleton in the summer of 1962. In the summer of 1963, Oswald attempted to infiltrate the CIA's favorite Cubans in New Orleans. He was arrested. The FBI sent reports on Oswald's arrest to Angleton's staff. They knew that he had attempted to infiltrate a CIA-funded group, that he had been arrested. And then they learned that he had attempted to travel to Cuba, a violation of U.S. law at the time, and he had made contact with a KGB officer in Mexico City.
Okay, Mr. Morley, did the CIA or FBI have intelligence prior to the assassination of President Kennedy that Lee Harvey Oswald intended to kill him?
No.
Did the FBI did not either?
No.
No one did. And then how do we, Mr. Davison, how do we make sure the government is more transparent with Congress? You have 20 seconds. Good luck.
I think in general, the most important thing is to provide the resources to agencies to process public records requests or requests from Congress so that this information can actually be reviewed and disclosed in a timely fashion, whether you are concerned about the truth of the statements that you raised at the top of your presentation, or if perhaps you want to understand more about the Trump administration's hateful campaign against trans individuals. Either way, you would require more resources for public records disclosure and requests.
Okay, and just for clarification, Mr. Morley, this is about as nonpartisan as this committee gets, so good job. Thank you. I'll now recognize Congressman Christian Morphy for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. President Kennedy's grandson, Jack Schlossberg, said conspiracies surrounding JFK
job. Thank you.
Joe
I'll now
Biden
recognize
when they found
Congressman
documents
Christian
in his
Morphy for 5
garage.
minutes.
The government tried to cover it up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. President Kennedy's grandson, Jack Schlossberg, said conspiracies surrounding JFK's death have shifted focus away from the important lessons of his life and the critical issues of the moment. So I'd like to focus a little bit on some of those lessons and issues. Mr. D. Eugenio, it's the start of baseball season. Go Cubs. So let's begin with JFK's 1960 letter to Jackie Robinson, in which JFK highlighted Robinson's role in the civil rights struggle. JFK said, quote, "I believe I understand and appreciate your role in continuing the struggle to fulfill America's promise of equal opportunity for all. Just last month, President Trump bizarrely ordered DOD to purge its website of all references to black history, black veterans, and even the reference to Jackie Robinson's own military service. In response, Mr. D. Eugenio, you posted that what Trump did was, quote, really sick. That's what you said, and that's what you believe, right, sir? Yes?
Did I say that?
Yeah, you did. And
okay, I'm sorry. I don't recall saying that. Okay, maybe I did, maybe I didn't. Okay.
yeah,
I wish you'd have given me before so I could have looked at it.
Mr. Morley, you said that JFK, quote, took great risks on behalf of all Americans in resisting the forces of militarism and racism.
Yes.
Donald Trump, on the other hand, recently eliminated, believe it or not, the prohibition on federal contractors using or maintaining racially segregated facilities. JFK would have rejected what Trump recently did, correct?
You know, I was invited here to talk about the JFK files, and I don't want to make a partisan political issue of it. Like I said, I'm a liberal Democrat, And if in general I had to choose between a conservative Republican like Donald Trump and a liberal Democrat like JFK, I would choose JFK.
Well, let me talk about USAID for a second, because that was something that JFK actually established. Sir, recently, USAID is now being shuttered. Again, that is something that is a very important part of his legacy, and that's something that he would have opposed, obviously, correct?
I think President Kennedy would have said that no government agency is sacrosanct, and I'm sure he would have said that any federal agency that should be abolished should be done in consultation between the President and Congress.
And that hasn't been done here, yes, sir?
Not that I know of.
Let me turn to another topic. Mr. Stone, some of your films, such as Platoon and Born on the 4th of July, were inspired by your own military experiences in the Army when you deployed to Vietnam in the 60s, right?
That's correct.
We have this picture here of you in Vietnam.
Thank you.
I thank you deeply for your service. We actually found a picture of you in Vietnam, and you were awarded the Bronze Star for Valor, correct?
That's correct.
You've written that your Bronze Star was because of your actions during a, quote, mean little ambush, which had cost you a lieutenant, a sergeant, and even your scout dog, correct?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. What was he saying?
He said, did it cost you a lieutenant and your scout dog, the ambush?
No, that's another incident, sir. That was later on in another infantry unit. That was the reason that led to my Bronze Star. Bronze Star came in August of that year. This wound occurred in October of '67.
Can I ask you about that? It's ambushes like this where sometimes people are waiting opportunistically to fire upon you, but sometimes they have some type of information that allows them to lie in wait for a surprise attack. And part of that information could be your whereabouts or the timing of your arrival, correct?
You're talking about friendly fire or fragging? Is this what you're...
Ambush from the enemy.
Ambushed, to be ambushed by your own man? Your own troops? Is that what you're saying?
Ambushed by the enemy, the adversary.
The adversary. Okay. Well, I'm a little confused, but I just want to make the point that, yes, there was a tremendous amount of friendly fire casualties in Vietnam, and there's in any war, I believe. In my experience, 10% doesn't even describe it. I think it's closer to 15 or 20% in terms of friendly fire deaths and wounds.
Yeah, Mr. Stone, we'd like to thank you for your service to this country. You are a war hero. You have a Bronze Star and a Purple Heart, and I think this committee reflects that. Thank you. The chair would like to now recognize Mr. Burchett.
Thank you, Chair Lady. For over 50 years, the assassination of President Kennedy has been shrouded in secrecy and corruption. The American people have been lied to repeatedly by this federal government. President Trump's executive orders declassified the critical documents. I think is a step in the right direction, but Congress must ensure that the bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. don't get away with what they've done, and they don't get in the way of transparency. Mr. Stone, I know you've talked about chain of custody, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on some of the NBC videos. And I know that since you've already talked about your service to our great country from '67 to '68, you were twice wounded in action. You received a Bronze Star, a Purple Heart, an Air Medal, and the Combat Infantry Badge. And we salute you for your service, sir. Today is the 80th anniversary of the invasion of Okinawa, and that's an island my dad was on. And he told me, he said the Purple Heart was one medal he was glad he never got. Mr. Stone, I'm going to ask for the indulgence of the chair lady and the members if I could just yield my time to you and you to discuss anything you would like to pertaining to this subject, and to ask any of the other men up here on the dais with you any questions you would like.
Well, I'd like to point out that in our film, JFK Revisited 2021, which is an important, I hope members of the committee have a chance to look at it, because it is a follow-up to the original film, and it's a documentary made with Mr. Di Eugenio as a writer, in which we we take the evidence from the AARB and we examine as much of it as we can. Included in that is the concept of chain of custody. We interviewed Henry Lee, who is one of the country's leading, what would you call him?
He's the leading criminalist in America.
Okay, a criminalist, whatever that. Okay, he was saying to us repeatedly, and he's on camera, a chain of custody has to go from the scene of the crime to the courtroom. Otherwise, it doesn't. You cannot bring the charge on Oswald or anybody. Well, that doesn't exist in this case. We went through this in the documentary. The rifle itself is not the one that is described in the film. It was shown of a man, a detective walking out with a rifle in his arms raised. That rifle does not resemble the one that was bought by Oswald out of the Chicago, supposedly bought by Oswald. Hidell was his name.
The one held up was a Mauser, and the one he allegedly shot him with was a Mannlicher Italian carbine, I believe.
The difference is that the one in evidence is longer. It's about 4 inches longer. It has a sling to it, and it has a screw in the butt of the rifle, which I consulted with some rifle experts, and they said Oswald could not have done that by himself. All right. So those are the differences between the one that the Warren Commission says Oswald actually purchased versus the one that they put into evidence.
No rifle and no bullets, I said. Now, the bullets is even more ridiculous. As you know, there's been a long amount of controversy about the CE-399, the magic, so-called magic bullet, which came out apparently undamaged after wounding seven or eight wounds. We don't have a chain of custody proving that those bullets were ever used. So those are not, they do not match the ones at the 6th floor that were pictured.
And that's the bullet that was found on the gurney, correct? Beside one of the bodies.
Yes, except we don't know which gurney it was found on. Okay? And then if you go to the chain of custody from, well, let me use this as an example. According to the evidence, all right, that bullet was turned over to the FBI at 9:20 that night. Okay, well, here's the problem. Frazier, who was the FBI ballistics expert, had the bullet at 7:35. How on earth can you have a bullet that hasn't been delivered into the White House? Because that's where the exchange took place. So that's one of the big problems. And I could go on for 2 hours on what's wrong with CE-399 as a piece of evidence. I don't think any district attorney in the United States would even try and submit CE-399 because it would blow up in your face. Concerning the medical that he mentioned, in the House Select Committee volumes, Volume 7, page 37, you will see a quote saying that the witnesses at Bethesda did not see this blown out back of the skull, which the witnesses at Parkland Hospital saw, which is strongly indicative of a shot from the front. All right? Well, this is what happened. When the ARB declassified all the medical files from the House Select Committee on Assassinations, that turned out to be a lie. Because as many people at Bethesda saw this blown out back of the skull as saw it at Parkland. There's, I think, 21 and 21. So you have a grand total of 42 people. Can 42 people all be wrong? You know? I mean, that just defies imagination.
435 people are often wrong, but that's Congress. That's Congress.
Thank you, Mr. Burchett. Ms. Lee, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and our Ranking Member Garcia for convening today's hearing, and thank you so much for the witnesses for being here. I don't want this task force to get drawn too far down the conspiracy theory rabbit hole when we convene these hearings, because the reality of the CIA's past action is troubling on its own. This dump of documents alone showed evidence of illegal surveillance, break-ins, overstepping of authority. We've even got specific instructions on how to wiretap, including how to use certain chemicals to create markings on phones to tip off spies. But we already knew this was happening. We knew that the CIA committed human rights abuses and illegally surveilled people, which is why the work declassifying these documents is so important. We've got to have transparency, right? So that we can learn to do better, so that we can hold agencies accountable. But being reckless with this sensitive information is also not the way to do it. Declassifying documents around the assassinations of President Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr. is a serious matter, and we owe it to the American people to get it right. Unfortunately, the rollout of documents we've seen so far has been sloppy and rushed. The release didn't really give us a smoking gun, but it did produce a plenty of collateral damage. Trump's actions have jeopardized the safety and security of hundreds of former congressional and federal employees by releasing their social security numbers and personal information to the public. And for what? To score political points by rushing the release. Many of the people whose personal information has been exposed are rightfully afraid about their identities being stolen and about threats to their personal safety. And people identified in the documents are already being forced to get new social security numbers at a time when President Trump is literally dismantling the agency that administers them. Mr. Davison, President Trump ordered the declassification and release of tens of thousands of pages within 24 hours. Do you think that that was problematic? And if so, why?
Thank you for the question. It was. Going back to January, there, of course, was the executive order requiring the disclosure of all the records in the collection. My understanding is that the process was playing out, that the archives was conducting the review it needed to determine what few bits of these records needed to be redacted to protect, among other things, the privacy of individuals whose information was contained therein. And then that process was short-circuited. And despite awareness at the National Security Council and the archives that the disclosure of these records would cause tangible privacy harm, the rollout was conducted without redactions all the same, leading to the situation where, hundreds of social security numbers have been disclosed, creating a quite scary and alarming situation for those whose numbers were implicated, who now have to rush to place freezes on their credit accounts, if they're issued new social security numbers, to update all of that information with all of their various accounts and creditors and so forth. So that it is a serious issue for the people affected, and it could have been avoided with just a little bit more due diligence of the sort that the archives normally exercises.
Yeah, so is there a way that Trump could have protected that personal information?
Is there a way that the president could have protected that information? Yeah, by going through the ordinary process of reviewing these documents and dictating that these particular social security numbers and other sensitive financial pieces of information would not be disclosed with the records.
Certainly, thank you. Mr. Morley, as someone who's read through all of the documents, do you think that the documents could have been better organized so it was more accessible to more people?
I want to say that the release of the social security numbers and other personal information was unprofessional, reckless, careless. I'm the vice president of the Mary Farrell Foundation, which sponsors the largest online archive of JFK, RFK, and MLK records. And I was authorized by the president to release this statement about the social security numbers. While the MFF is an advocate of full transparency and the JFK Records Act make no exception for such information, we are electing to redact all the social security numbers in these records, unlike seemingly mundane document details, which sometimes do add to the history of the case.
Yeah.
Social security numbers add nothing of value and expose their holders to possible identity theft. Accordingly, when we put these particular documents online in the coming weeks, we will be adding our own redactions to them. We will not be redacting other information. Most other data is long.
Certainly, Mr. Morley. Thank you so much for adding that.
Yeah.
I just want to be clear. An open and transparent federal government is essential for public trust, and declassification is a good thing. There is a way to do this. It is important that we are not sloppy, that we are not rushing things, that we are not doing things in just a haphazard way, as we've seen with so many things that DOJ and the administration has touched. What we want is for this information to be out. We want people to understand the past. Our agencies, the CIA, we need to do it right. With that, I yield back.
Thank you very much. Without further ado, I'd like to recognize Ms. Boebert for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to our witnesses for being here today. Hopefully we can stay on topic for the rest of this hearing. We seem to be wrapping up pretty close here. Mr. Stone, you wrote a book accusing LBJ of being involved in the killing of President Kennedy. Do these most recent releases confirm or negate your initial charge? Being involved in the assassination of President Kennedy.
No, I didn't. In the film, if you look closely, there's no such statements. No, I didn't. If you
Yes,
look
sir.
closely at the film, there's no. It accuses the President Johnson
Okay.
of being part of complicit in a cover-up of the case, but not in the assassination itself, which I don't know.
What do you think that he was complicit with? Yes, sir. I'll get to you.
The cover-up. Well, how about, for starters, appointing Alan Dulles, the head of the CIA, who was fired by Kennedy, to the commission itself, to the Warren Commission, and he goes to almost every meeting, and he's pretty much in charge of the Warren Commission from the beginning. Alan Dulles. That's part of the evidence that points to President Johnson's either incompetence or involvement.
Mr. Morley, I think you had something to add on that.
I think you're confusing Mr. Oliver Stone with Mr. Roger Stone.
I it yet.
Who?
Sorry.
It's Roger Stone who implicated LBJ in the assassination of the president. It's not my friend
Is that what all the
Oliver
whispers
Stone.
were there? I may have misinterpreted that, and I apologize for that. But there's seems to be some alluding of, like you said, incompetence or some sort of involvement there on the back end. And so sorry, I'm going to move on. Mr. Morley, I would like to talk more about the CE 399 and this file. I want the American people to know what's in there, that what was recently released, how that lines up to this, and how we could get more clarity there.
I'm not familiar with the number that you mentioned.
Mr. D.
Are you talking about Commission Exhibit 399?
Yeah.
Okay.
I yield my time to
Without
Jim.
All right.
I have more questions for you too,
All right.
Mr. Morley.
The Commission Exhibit 399 has a very wild trajectory, which I think any person familiar with ballistics, would question in the first place. Then the second place is it has a very, very dubious chain of custody. All right, from it was first captured at Parkland Hospital. Tomlinson and Wright, who worked there, turned it over to the Secret Service. Then the Secret Service turned it over to the FBI. Any investigator would want to interview Mr. Wright because he was the security guy who turned over the bullet to the Secret Service. Well, Wright was not interviewed, and there's a good reason he wasn't interviewed. When Josiah Thompson was writing his book, 6 Seconds in Dallas, he interviewed O.P. Wright, who was the director of security at Parkland Hospital. And he said, yeah, I'm the guy who gave and Thompson put up a picture of CE 399 in front of him. And Wright said, they say that's the bullet that I turned over to the Secret Service? And he said, yes. And he says, no, I did not turn over that bullet. And he opened up the drawer, okay, and because he was in charge of the whole security thing, and he pulled out a bullet and says, this is the kind of bullet that it wasn't a hunting round, okay, all right? And so he said, and he was, by the way, he was so stupefied that after the interview, he chased Thompson down the hallway. And he said, are you sure that's the bullet I said, that they said I turned over? And he said, yes. And he just shook his head. I can't believe, he couldn't believe it.
Thank you. I would love to go into that deeper. But Mr. Morley, before my time is up, why do you believe that the CIA was surveilling Lee Harvey Oswald in the years before JFK's assassination, and what methods did the CIA use in this surveillance?
One of the documents that was released last month revealed that when Angleton put people on the list for intercepting their mail, his purpose was to approach them to be a contact or a source. So I believe that Angleton, when he put Oswald under mail surveillance, was considering using him as a contact, as a source. The means of surveillance that were used were first mail surveillance, and then Oswald came under photographic surveillance, wiretap surveillance, and contact with CIA-funded groups.
Thank you. Madam Chair, I yield.
I now recognize Ms. Crockett for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much. There often isn't too much agreement when it comes specifically to Congress, let alone to this particular committee. And I will tell you that y'all have given me all the feels as someone who had an opportunity to practice law. So when you start talking about things such as chain of custody, these are the things that I used to challenge all the time as a defense attorney. And the reason that I had to make sure that I was here and specifically on today is because on November 22nd, 1963, Texas 30th Congressional District, the district that I represent, became the site of one of the most tragic events in American political history. After being struck by the bullets of an assassin, Lee Harvey Oswald, President Kennedy was rushed to Parkland Hospital, where hardworking physicians from the UT Southwestern Medical Center worked tirelessly to resuscitate him. During the 48 hours between the moment President Kennedy was shot to the moment when Oswald was pronounced dead, Texas 30th Congressional District became the temporary seat of the U.S. government, the temporary seat of the Texas government, the site of the 35th president's death, and the center of the world's attention. While I value government accountability and transparency like most of my colleagues, nearly all the previously classified JFK assassination files are now public and show no evidence of a CIA conspiracy. But what I find funny about this hearing is that the Republicans are here relitigating whether CIA agents lied 60 years ago, but aren't doing anything about the CIA director lying to Congress just 6 days ago. We should be having a hearing on the fact that the unqualified Secretary of Defense and other senior Trump officials were carelessly discussing classified military plans over an unsecure Signal group chat. And instead of providing oversight over the administration's handling of classified information, the Republicans have spent a week trying to convince the American people that the military plans were not classified. So instead of giving a platform to conspiracy theories, and let me be clear, there are holes. I don't want y'all to think that I don't think that there are holes. But when we're looking back, we need to look back so that we can look forward and hopefully do better. So that is why I am bringing us to present day. It might be helpful if we walk everyone through the classification and declassification process, since the Republicans have decided to do it this way. Federal law defines classified information as, quote, information or material requiring a specific degree of protection against unauthorized disclosure for reasons of national security. Federal law also defines disclosure as, quote, communicating, providing, transmitting, transferring, conveying, publishing, or otherwise making available. Congress has long enacted classified information laws that forbid the disclosure of classified information. Separately, Executive Order 13526 puts in place a uniform system for classifying and declassifying national security information. According to the executive order, classified information includes the following, quote, military plans, weapons, systems, or operations, intelligence activities, including covert actions, intelligence sources or methods, and foreign relations or foreign activities of the United States, including confidential sources. Under the, quote, general responsibilities provision of the executive order, quote, heads of agencies shall ensure the agency record system are designed and maintained to optimize the appropriate sharing and safeguarding of classified information and help facilitate its declassification, not to mention that it's also illegal under federal law to destroy classified documents and information. So this administration is breaking law by discussing classified information over unsecured channels and breaking the law by destroying the evidence of the conversations. We wouldn't be able to have today's hearing if the CIA destroyed the records associated with the assassination of President Kennedy. So, Mr. Morley, wouldn't it be impossible for you to accurately report on the JFK assassination if the CIA and FBI deleted all documents like the Trump administration officials plan to do in the Signal group chat?
The CIA destroyed a lot of records related to President Kennedy's assassination. Again, I didn't come here to engage in a debate about partisan politics. I think everybody agrees about the JFK files. And I want to endorse Mr. Davison's call for full funding of public records offices in the government.
I understand. And Mr. Stone, wouldn't it be nearly impossible to produce a film if there was not a legitimate record of these events taking place?
Well, that's a very good question. Not really. Oh, I'm sorry. That's a very good question. Not really. I mean, the events unfolded as they did, and right away, from day one, people were pointing out inconsistencies, way before there was an official record of this.
Thank you. With that, I will yield.
Mr. Morley, Mr. Stone, Mr. Eugenio, I just want to say thank you for being here, taking time out of your day, and I want to apologize that not everyone on this hearing seems to want to use this time to its fullest extent. And so I want to start by saying thank you, Mr. Stone. Shortly after your film's release, the United States Congress passed the JFK Assassination Records Collection Act of 1992, and you did something that I don't know that I've done in my career. It passed unanimously. I want to give you an opportunity to talk about how it felt and the impact of having a movie that not only has spurred multiple hearings of Congress, but unanimously passed a bill through Congress.
Sir, I was at the time, I was told that by many people who were involved, and they were very happy and thought that this was a great public duty. I didn't feel that way. I felt like I was being skewered the whole time in the media, and many people volunteered, important people volunteered negative impressions that were not based, I don't think, on reality. That the people didn't bother to see the film, for example, and were saying that he's got Lyndon Johnson and all that involved and blah, 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 and he's got 55 people, different agencies involved. I mean, this is nonsense.
Well, I just want to say on behalf of the American people, thank you for what you did, because because of your work, we now have documents like this one. Madam Chair, I'd like to enter into the record a CIA document that ends in number 10056.
Without objection, so ordered.
In this document, it describes that, it dispels the narrative that when Oswald visited Mexico City, that he only met with Sylvia Duran. In fact, in this document, he met with a KGB official. Remarkably, the individual by the name of Kostakov was actually a member of KGB and Department 13.
Yeah.
Because of your work, we now have this kind of evidence. He actually met with a member of the KGB who was part of the Wet Works, the assassination team. I also want to say thank you because of your work, we have another document that I want to enter into the record. This is ends in 10191.
Without objection, so ordered.
In this document, we have a testimony that an individual named Francisco Tamayo, otherwise known as the El Mexicano, accompanied Lee Harvey Oswald into Mexico City for his meetings in both the Cuban embassy and the Russian embassy. Stone, I'm shocked that this narrative is only really been something that we've seen only in the last few years. You would think that the Warren report would have reported the fact that Oswald had met with a KGB individual in the Department 13 of, basically the Assassination Division, and that he was accompanied by an individual known as El Mexicano, that later an FBI report indicated that this individual, El Mexicano, was captured in Venezuela for attempting to assassinate another individual. Mr. Morley, I want to ask you about Mr. Angleton. Who is Mr. Angleton?
James Angleton was the chief of CIA counterintelligence from 1954 to 1974. In that period, he was one of the most influential men in the CIA, serving under four different directors.
And what did he tell the Warren Commission in 1963 and 64?
When the Warren Commission came asking Angleton for information about Oswald's visit to Mexico City, Angleton wrote a memo, or told his aides that he wanted to, and this is a quote, wait out the commission. He did not cooperate, and like like Richard Helms, they both basically fooled the Warren Commission and deceived them about what they knew about Oswald.
And later, we now have, because of the work of Mr. Stone and others, we have Mr. Angleton's testimony that he gave to the Assassination Committee, the House Select Committee on Assassinations. What insights did we gain from that?
This document was not fully declassified until March 18th, and in there we learned for the first time that Angleton had lied to the House Select Committee when he testified in October 1978 in an office building about 2 blocks from here. And that was never known before until March 18th that he had done that, and that is one of the most significant revelations to come out of this. People will say, oh, well, there's nothing new here. No, there's something new here. The New York Times, the Washington Post have never reported that 3 top CIA officials lied to the JFK investigators.
Yeah, and the fact that we have 3 CIA officials that lied to Congress for decades, and that it took decades to get documents that should have been released that had very compelling information, and it took 60 years to get that information released, is appalling. And that's why I want to say thank you to all of your work in helping to get this information released.
Thank you.
I'd like to now recognize Mr. Crane for 5 minutes. Oh, sorry. Unanimous consent without objection to ordered.
So I have some more documents I want to enter into the record. Here's from the National Archives, a NARA letter dated 2017 that the CIA withheld docs regardless of the JFK Act.
Without objection, so ordered.
Another document from the archives that the Warren Commission did not have original classification authority.
Without objection, so ordered.
And then another document from the archives that the FBI's reasoning for redactions dated 2017 in the NARA letter.
Without objection, so ordered. I'd like to now recognize Mr. Crane for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Ms. Chairwoman. Thank you guys for coming out today. You guys have probably forgot more about the JFK assassination than I'll ever know, so I'm still going to ask you some questions, and I appreciate your, just how dogged you guys have been on this for decades. Mr. Morley, I want to start with you. What is the most interesting information you found in this newest release of documents on the assassination of President Kennedy?
The 9 memos about James Angleton that were fully declassified on March 18th is the most important collection that I've seen so far. There is a lot of information that has come out. Jim mentioned the Arthur Schlesinger memo. That really sets the stage for the alienation between the Kennedy White House and the CIA that lasted for the rest of Kennedy's presidency. So I would say that the Angleton memos and the Schlesinger memo are the most important things I've seen so far.
Thank you. Mr. Morley, do you believe that Oswald was recruited and being handled as a source for the CIA?
I believe Oswald was an agent of influence who was manipulated by the CIA.
Okay. And as I was going through some research, one of the things that I found interesting And please correct me if I'm mistaken here, any of you guys on the panel, but Mr. Underhill, who was a CIA agent himself, who apparently left D.C. the days after the assassination in a hurry, Gary Underhill then confided in a friend that a clique within the CIA had assassinated Kennedy. He also told his friends that he may need to leave the country and that he feared for his life. Mr. Underhill was then found dead 6 months later. I'm going to start with you, Mr. Morley. Do you find those types of stories surrounding Mr. Underhill to be credible?
Mr. Underhill was hardly alone in suspecting CIA involvement of the assassination. President Harry Truman suspected it, President Johnson suspected it, and President Richard Nixon suspected it. So I think that Gary Underhill was a man who worked in the intelligence community and was in a position to know something. His story's not confirmed, but it's consistent with what lots of other people thought.
What was his title? Do you remember, Mr. Morley?
He was not a CIA employee. He was an arms dealer who assisted CIA in acquiring weapons and, shipping them.
Do you know how he died, Mr. Morley?
I don't know anything more than was reported in the documents.
Mr. Eugenio, do you know how he died?
Eugenio.
Sorry about that.
You're not the first one.
Yeah. Do you know how he died, sir? Mr. Underhill.
Do you know how he died?
Gary Underhill?
Yeah.
Gary Underhill his body was discovered by his friend Asher Burns, who was a magazine writer at the time. And the door was open, ajar a little, and Burns entered the room, and he thought Underhill was sleeping. But as he approached the body, he saw that there was a hole, a bullet hole in his head, all right? Asher Burns was so disgusted by the investigation that came after that he didn't even want to talk about what had happened. But one of the things about the Underhill death is that for him to have taken his own life, the gun was in the wrong hand. Okay? All right? So that was one of the most puzzling things, about that particular case. Underhill has been, I believe, very much ignored, by a lot of people. And I'm glad that this memo finally got out there.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Morley, are you familiar with Michael Franchese, who is a capo for the Colombo family?
I've appeared with him twice on the Piers Morgan show. That's all I know.
Okay, thank you. He claims that the mob was involved in this hit since the deal between the Kennedys and the mob was broken after the election. Do you find that to be credible?
I think Mr. Franzene's contention that the organized crime role in President Kennedy's assassination is very clear, and he said that it was common knowledge among the crime bosses who he dealt with that their role in the assassination was to eliminate the chief witness, Lee Harvey Oswald. Mr. Franzene said that both times when I was on Piers Morgan with him, and I believe him.
Yeah, thank you. This question is more based on the future, or I should say the present day. After 2 assassination attempts of President Trump within the last year, and the little that we now know about Thomas Crooks and Ryan Ruth, do any of you guys on the panel believe that we are seeing history repeat itself?
No.
Mr. Stone?
I expressed my own surprise that so little do we still know about Mr. Crooks and the other assassination attempt. So I would see similarities here.
Thank you. I'm out of time. I yield back.
Thank you very much. I'd like to now recognize Mr. Gill for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman Luna. According to Pew Research, trust in the federal government has plummeted from 74% in 1958 to 22% in 2025. That's a trajectory that is utterly unsustainable and in the long term incompatible with democratic self-governance. unfortunately, a lot of that decline in trust is justified. The JFK assassination attempt, the JFK assassination happened over 60 years ago, and we still don't have all of the facts about what happened that day. Mr. Morley, thank you for being here, and thank you for all of your work that you've done on this. Do you believe that the CIA is in compliance with President Trump's executive order to declassify and release the JFK files?
No, there are important records that have not been provided, like the personnel file of George Ioannidis. I should also note that as we go through these records, there are still redactions in some of these records, and not a huge amount, but we have not had full compliance either in producing all the records or in redacting or completely releasing all the records that were redacted.
And for the record, how many of the JFK files has the CIA released since the executive order was issued?
The figure of 80,000 pages is accurate as far as we can tell, and that's information from several thousand documents.
Are those from the CIA specifically?
Most of the records that were released last month, about 80% of them were from the CIA.
Okay. And how many documents do you believe the CIA still has that either haven't been released or are overly redacted?
Since we haven't seen them, it's hard to put a number on it, but I would put the number in the hundreds. Okay. Hundreds of documents.
Hundreds, okay. And you are one of the foremost researchers on this topic. In your opinion, since the Warren Commission, has the federal government been forthcoming with information related to the JFK assassination?
No. All of this information could have been released a long time ago. By law, all of it should have been released 8 years ago. So the attitude of obstruction and obfuscation from the CIA started on November 22nd, 1963, when CIA officers started lying about what the CIA knew. And that attitude, unfortunately, has continued to the present day.
And we've had several congressional investigations related to these files. During those inquiries, in your estimation, do you believe that any FBI, CIA, or other government officials have lied under oath or deliberately misled investigators?
In my remarks, I identified 3 of them who definitely lied. It's beyond reasonable doubt. Counterintelligence Chief Angleton, Director Helms, and Branch Chief George Ioannidis.
Mm-hmm. And given the amount of uncertainty that we have related to these files, do you believe that there's information that we'll never know about because, for instance, maybe the information has already been permanently deleted or the figures involved have died?
I'm actually optimistic that we can get to the bottom of this matter. We have a new attitude on the part of the government. We have President Trump's executive order, which strengthens the existing mandates of the JFK Records Act. So I think if the task force and the public and the Congress apply pressure and demand this material, we can get it and we can reach a decisive clarification about the causes of President Kennedy's assassination.
Thank you, and I'd like to yield the balance of my time to the chairwoman.
Thank you very, very much, Mr. Gill. Mr. Stone, I'd like to ask you specifically, in talking with you earlier, you mentioned 3 women that were witnesses that had their testimonies omitted by the Warren Commission in regards to seeing Oswald in the book depository. Can you speak to that a little bit, please?
Yes, it's a very interesting piece of information that we put into our documentary, JFK Revisited. It came out of the AAR. It came out of the ARB, or it came out from...
I'm not sure if it...
Anyway.
It came out in recent years.
It came out in recent years around that time. Barry Ernst wrote about it and was interviewed in our film, in which he says that in addition to, there were 3 women on the 4th floor who, during the time of the assassination, they witnessed it from above, and immediately they were headed down to see what was going on at a closer angle. 2 of the women went downstairs quickly. The 3rd woman, Dorothy Garner, who was a supervisor, an older woman, watched them go down the stairs. They were down. All this happened within 30 seconds. Oswald was on the, if he was on the 6th floor, which I sincerely doubt, had to be a track star to store the weapon, to run across the floor and go down those same stairs, and appear as he did to Marion Baker in the 2nd floor lunchroom. All of this was highly unlikely, and I think that should be addressed. Two of the women are still alive.
See, no, Victoria Adams passed away. I think Sandy Stiles is still alive. The Garner, it's called the Stroud document, and it has Garner's testimony in it. All right. This was discovered by writer Barry Ernest in 1999 as a result of the ARB. All right. And it turned out that the Texas Attorney General, Stroud, had talked to Garner, the supervisor, and sent this information to the Warren Commission in the summer of 1964. But you won't find it in any of the Warren Commission volumes, even though it's a kind of important piece of evidence, because Garner said that, you know, she never saw Oswald on the stairs, and the two girls went down before the policeman and the supervisor, Roy Truly, came up. So it's very hard to believe that Oswald was tearing down those stairs, you know, and this woman never saw him.
Mr. Oswald, Mr. Stone, sorry, lots of Oswald today. Mr. Stone, one of my last questions for you before we wrap up this hearing. Would you recommend that the task force send a letter requesting NBC make a clear copy of the film?
Certainly, that'd be very interesting. Mr. D. Eugenio and I saw a film of a potential Oswald watching the motorcade go by, which means that he was downstairs at the time of the shooting, and that would be very interesting to see. We couldn't say for sure that was Oswald, but it's a man who looks like him. So I think it would be a very good idea for the task force to subpoena NBC, which has the original film.
Yes, they supposedly have the original. Yeah.
They have the original film. They've refused it twice to be shown.
Yes.
And if this task force could easily get that, and the American public should have a right to judge for itself who was standing there.
Well, first of all, I would like to thank our witnesses for being here today. There are those in our country who may ask why this task force seeks to pursue the truth underlying the facts surrounding the assassination of President John F. Kennedy in 1963. And the answer to that is the truth. Even the truth delayed and justice, even justice delayed, is always worth attaining. And the men and women who have sought answers regarding the assassination of the American President John F. Kennedy for all the world to see have been obstructed and hampered by our own government for over 60 years. This hearing is not meant to provide a definitive explanation of the Kennedy assassination. This hearing demonstrates, however, that the CIA and other components of the federal government have not been honest with the American people that they are meant to serve up until recent efforts. And the American people must hold these agencies accountable, and they can. I've invited Mr. Stone, a filmmaker, to this hearing because he did just that, motivating Congress in the 1990s to pass a law that began the declassification process. And I'd like to applaud our president for continuing this process as he promised to do so. Researchers like Mr. Morley and Mr. DiEugenio have provided new information that helped bring light to some of the darkest days in American history. And I would like to thank the witnesses again and applaud their work. The search for truth continues, and the task force will pursue this at any price. I'd also like to note that we are planning on sending a letter to NBC requesting what you've recommended, Mr. Stone. Before I wrap it up, I would just like to say, do you guys have any statements in closing for the American people?
I would just like to thank you, Chairwoman Luna, for your aggressive, action-oriented approach to this issue. While we diverge politically, it's been a pleasure to work with you, and your leadership is important on this. Like I said before, I think we are making progress.
Thank you. Mr. Stone or Mr. DiEugenio?
Thank you, Chairwoman. I really admire what you're doing, and I wish you the best of success.
Mr. DiEugenio?
I think one of the things that the committee should do is talk to some of the people who are on the ARB, so you can understand just how difficult it was for them and why they couldn't complete their job. All right, I certainly hope that this committee does complete that job. And finally, 62 years later, we'll know everything the government did know about the. One thing that the gentleman down here asked about, see, very few people know there were 3 attempts on JFK's life in November. Okay? There was one in Chicago, there was one in Tampa, and then there was the successful one, in Dallas. The Chicago attempt so much resembles what happened in Dallas that if the Secret Service would have given all those records over, okay, then the Dallas one might have been prevented. At the one in Tampa, that one, there was just the opposite of Dallas. You had wall-to-wall Secret Service, FBI, et cetera. And Kennedy was so happy that he got away, that he stayed after at the Floridian Hotel and insisted on shaking hands with every single officer that was involved in that attempt. All right? So these are some of the records that are still out there.
Thank you very much, Mr. DiEugenio. And Mr. Davidson?
I'll just thank you again for the opportunity to testify and to encourage the task force again to take all steps possible as this process moves forward to ensure the protection of the privacy of individuals who are named in these records and to ensure that federal public records offices have the resources they need to provide valuable public information to the public in a timely fashion.
Absolutely. I know that, although I do not speak for this administration, that I know that everyone is well aware of the Social Securities and working to the best of their ability to ensure that those people are taken care of. So that is being looked into on our end. Without further ado, without objection, all members have 5 legislative days within this to submit materials and to submit additional witnesses or written questions for the witnesses, which will be forwarded to the witnesses for response. If there are no further business, without objection, the task force stands adjourned. Thank you.